On October 21st, when Obama announced the last troops would leave Iraq in December, here's what he said. Quote, "The last American soldiers will cross the border out of Iraq with their heads held high, proud of their success and knowing that the American people stand united in our support for our troops. This December will be a time to reflect on all that we've been through in this war. I'll join the American people in paying tribute to the more than 1 million Americans who've served in Iraq. We'll honor our many wounded warriors and the nearly 4,500 American patriots and their Iraqi coalition partners who gave their lives to this effort." Just stop and, I mean, I could spend an hour just dissecting that, but just stop and think for 1 minute about that. Our heads held high, as if this was some kind of a triumph. Support the troops. What, the troops at Haditha, who murdered 24 women and children and others because someone was killed by a roadside bomb, and then it was covered up, or all the other atrocities we could mention. And then I like this. It's time to reflect on all we have been through. Not Riverbend, not the people you talk to in Syria. No, not them. And let's honor the 4,500. Oh, and those other Iraqis, the throwaway line, who sacrificed their lives. In other words, American lives are all that count here. American chauvinism and support for the American military that's carrying out illegal, unjust, immoral wars and committing war crimes. So anyway, with that, I am glad to be talking about Iraq. We can't erase the memory of Iraq, of what happened there, the lessons we should be learning. And I like David's point. No, repeat the lies that we're told. Let people know. And that's, I thought about, it's just, my book actually deals with a history of U.S. and British intervention in Iraq since the 1920s. It goes through the Iran-Iraq War, the sanctions. It's interesting because now there's a big thing about the IAEA in Iran, right? Well, if you read my book, you'll find out the IAEA was involved in planning coups d'etats and assassination attempts against Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Of course, that's not mentioned. But anyway, so I think it's very important to ponder the real lessons of Iraq, and that's what I want to do today. And not feel, oh well, and this is reflected in our attendance here. Oh, that's over with. Let's move on, or let's move nowhere. But we really, the Iraq War is incredibly revealing of the nature of this system, the illegitimacy of the entire system, and the need for fundamental change and revolution. Okay. If you stop and think about this. And that's what I want to reflect on a little bit here today. So first of all, what I want to start out with is a quote, which I think I want to deconstruct this. This is from Basics, from the talks and writings of Bob Avakian, who's the leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party that I support. I write for its newspaper, Revolution. He writes, the essence of what exists in the U.S. is not democracy, but capitalism, imperialism, and political structures to enforce that capitalism, imperialism.
Absolutely.
What the U.S. spreads around the world is not democracy, but imperialism and political structures to enforce that imperialism. So just think about that. Not democracy, but capitalism, imperialism, and political structures that support it. We didn't vote for the Iraq War, if you remember, and when the Iraq War began, 15 million people around the world, and I mean hundreds of thousands in this country, went out for the biggest protest, you know, and I think even as big as some of them in the 60s. Oh, that's a focus group, never mind. In other words, the political structures were not in any way reflective of what people needed or want. They reflected the needs of capitalism, imperialism. That's what they were doing. Did the war reflect the consent of the governed? Oh, here's what we're going to do in Iraq. Would you like us to do that? No, as David pointed out, one lie after another. You know, sometimes, and I liked your 10 lies because it is hard to get how contorted and conflated and twisted all of this. No, Saddam Hussein's a Sunni and he's a secular ruler, but no, he's in bed with Al-Qaeda, the Islamic fundamentalists, who, by the way, hate him. I mean, you know, never mind, it's all, we heard it on Fox News. You know, what about the so-called free press? That's supposed to be a pillar of democracy. It wasn't just that they repeated lies, they suppressed anyone who spoke the truth. Phil Donahue, gone. You know, Jeff Cohen, who's at this at the Left Forum here, I saw presenting. I think he's with you tomorrow or something. Yeah,
tomorrow.
Yeah,
big auditorium.
He writes a book about how on the Phil Donahue show, if they had one leftist, they had to have 10 right-wingers to balance it out. You know, in other words, there's a dictatorship in the media that serves capitalism, imperialism, and then what does that say about the nature of that system? It's a system. In other words, this quote I read, what the essence of what exists, points to the fact that the economic base of society, the capitalist system, is what sets the terms, not public opinion, not the interests of people, not how you vote, none of that. The system is determined and the terms are set by the needs of this capitalist imperialist system. And the political structures serve that. And what are the needs of that system? This is a system that demands global exploitation of labor. Go see the Mike Daisy agony and ecstasy of Steve Jobs, Apple, all their parts made in China and so on and so forth. And it demands control of resources, it demands control of markets, and all of this is enforced how? By military bases in 732 military bases in what, 120 or 130 countries, and one war or intervention after another by violence. And this is how the system actually functions. This is how it works. And this is actually what was behind the Iraq War, because a lot of people realize that lies were told in the Iraq War, but they don't realize why the war was fought. You know, this is the biggest lie of all. The New York Times sometimes will say, well, it's true that Judith Miller made a mistake in her reporting. You know, we'll leave aside the fact that all this was deliberate. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't bad intelligence. But what they never tell you is, oh, by the way, this was a war of imperialism, because since the collapse of the Soviet Union, we, the U.S. ruling class, realized that we have an opportunity to create an unchallenged empire across the globe because we don't face any other superpowers. And if we don't seize this opportunity, our window of the unipolar moment, as they called it, could vanish and would be in big trouble, because we have a lot of problems and contradictions in our own system, and we're facing China and Russia. They could reemerge. In fact, let's not even let any regional powers rise to challenge us. And this was the driving logic behind the whole war on terror and the invasion of Iraq. A lot of people thought, oh, the invasion of Iraq was a diversion from the quote-unquote real war on terror. No, it wasn't. It was the perfect embodiment of the quote-unquote real war on terror, which was never about simply catching a few dozen or a few hundred or however many there were, Al-Qaeda or Saudi or, whatever, group did the 9/11 attacks. It was about restructuring the entire Middle East and Central Asia and locking it more firmly under U.S. domination, and yes, defeating Islamic fundamentalism because it was creating problems for the U.S. This is a big reason they don't like Iran. And then using that region really as a hammer against the rest of the world. Why is the Middle East so important to the functioning of the system? And here, I do think the capitalist class overall benefits from this. That's what keeps the wheels humming and turning. Yes, they're contractors that make some money, sure, but that's not the essence of it, because one U.S. president after another, Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter, has considered the control of the Middle East central to U.S. global power, right? This is why Israel looms so large for the U.S., because it's their military outpost. The Middle East, 60% of the world's energy sources. Energy is a strategic commodity that allows you, it's not about SUVs and, do consumers have good gas prices. It's about global dominance, because if you control oil, you can shape the global economy and you can control powers that depend on oil. And again, I document all of this in the book, quotes from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And then the Middle East, I brought my map and forgot to bring it here. It's the crossroads between Africa, Asia, Europe. Every world war, what gets invaded? The Middle East. So this is what the war on Iraq was about. Iraq was a problem. Overthrow Hussein. Try to reshape this whole region. And then what did the U.S. export to Iraq? Not democracy, but political structures that support capitalism, imperialism. They had their handful of crony puppets and bootlickers that they wanted to put in power. That didn't work out for them. So what did they do? They empowered reactionary Shia religious parties, religious fundamentalists, and capitalists and oppressors. Is what they did. That's what they brought to Iraq. And Mike and David have both talked about the horrors that this has meant for the Iraqi people. I don't care how many Iraqis hold up their purple fingers because they voted. This was a vote taken after the U.S. conquered Iraq, and it was under military occupation, and it was shaped to a large degree, not simply because the U.S. hasn't had full control of this, by the U.S. military. So, and I just think it's important to think about these things, because if people understood the essence of what exists in the United States is not democracy, but capitalism, imperialism, and political structures that support capitalism, imperialism, they would think completely differently about why things happen, what to do about any of this, the elections, voting, all this nonsense we see on television, campaigning 24 hours a day, and just basically it's which imperialist is going to audition for the other imperialists about who's going to be chosen to lead the imperialist empire. People wouldn't be so baffled about Obama. Gosh, I thought he was such a good man. Why is he doing it? He is part of a political structure that serves capitalism, imperialism. Obama the peacemaker, now getting ready to attack war. So these are things I think that are just incredibly important to think about. Secondly, the illegitimacy. Here's the shame of this thing. First of all, you read a lot. What did we learn from this? As if all of us are the same as the 1% or the ruling class that actually run the system. Well, they learned to do this in a more clever way. In other words, Obama is being, in a certain way, more cautious about Iran because he knows he has to build up the diplomatic and the public opinion in a more careful way than Bush did against Iraq. The U.S. paid dearly for the fact that he wasn't able to get UN sanction for this, that it was obviously a war crime, an illegal war, and because, so many people saw it as utterly illegitimate, So this is one thing they've learned. They haven't learned not to fight wars. They haven't learned, gee, imperialism's no good, it really hurts a lot of people. No. This is the shame of it. You were, what you were saying, David, made me think about this. You said, war doesn't do anyone any good, and it's true. It's brought one horror after another to the Iraqi people, but the U.S. imperialists are still at it. They are still trying to fight their way through all this chaos and suffering they've created in the Middle East in order to come out of it with renewed control. Look at what they're doing in Syria. Here, Bahrain, it's great if Bahrain represses all the people. That's not a problem. But the U.S. is talking about military intervention in Syria now. So what? How am I?
Maybe 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay. All right.
Got a question?
So, well, that'll be 4 minutes. So the point is, and now, how is the U.S. making up for a strategic defeat in Iraq? This is one of the reasons that they're escalating the threats on Iran, which are very serious and very real. I'm going to be doing a panel tomorrow at 10 in the morning in the large lecture hall north with Michael Clare and Layla Zand on this. But look, the concluding part of what I really want to get to is that if this system is responsible for all this, and I am arguing that it is, we need a whole different system. I mean, if we're serious about stopping this, I don't want to be protesting war for the rest of my life and my children's and their children and all that. We need to end this. I think this is possible through revolution and socialism and communism. And I think it's possible because there's a new vision of revolution and communism that's been brought forward by Baba Bakian that I really urge people to engage with and find out about. He's looked at the experience of revolutions in the past, the great achievements, but also the serious shortcomings, and incorporated a lot of the knowledge that's come forward since the last revolutions happened under Lenin and Mao, and brought forward this very vibrant new synthesis of communism. And I want to read I want people to stop and imagine what the world would be like if we did live in a socialist republic based on this new synthesis. Because I'm going to read from this new constitution, which is a blueprint for such a republic, very different than what we live now. And I want to just read a passage on what this socialist state would do the day after the revolution in terms of foreign policy. Here's what it says. We will dismantle all remaining bases of the former imperialist USA and other countries. The new socialist republic renounces all wars of aggression and domination and all occupation of other countries. It will not develop and will not use nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction. It will wage a determined and many-sided struggle to rid the world of all such weapons, and it will do this as part of the larger overall struggle to defeat and dismantle all imperialist and reactionary states and forces and to advance toward the achievement of communism throughout the world, which will finally make it possible for the desires and dreams of countless human beings throughout history and the fundamental interests of humanity for a world without war to at long last be realized. I believe that's a future worth fighting for. Thank you.